Hey, friends, welcome back to the podcast. I have been thinking a lot lately about how hard it can be to find balance as a parent between giving our teens space and still guiding them in a way that feels respectful and connected. So, this morning, for example, I was sipping my coffee and scrolling through my to do list, and I realized just how many conversations I've had this week with parents about boundaries. It seems like this is a theme that really comes up over and over again with my work with parents, with my work with teens. So, the question of how do we set boundaries? How do we hold firm to our boundaries? And when do we need to actually step back? So, if you've been feeling like you're constantly walking on eggshells or stuck in a cycle of arguing, this episode is definitely for you. And it really, comes from a lot of my own personal experience as a parent, as well as my experience as a coach, because believe me, I have gone through so much of this as a parent, right? On my own parenting journey. I remember a time in my parenthood where I was like the boundary police. I was constantly laying down boundaries, especially for my son all the time. Just the answer is no, you need to do this. Why didn't you do that? You need to pick that up right now. You can't talk to me that way. Just so many boundaries all the time. And so what it created in our relationship was a lot of disconnection and a lot of explosive arguments. And it was not good for anybody, right? Not only were the things not getting done anyway, but there was so much pushback and resistance and resentment and disconnection that, just was a lose lose situation, basically. And so over the years, I've really learned like how to, put in more deposits in the bank because setting boundaries really does count as a withdrawal to our teens, right? So if we're thinking about 5 positive interactions to 1 negative, right, which is the ratio that has been studied and shown to be the ratio needed in order to really have good connection in our relationships. So if we're thinking about that 5-to-1 ratio, right, and all day long we're setting boundaries which count as a negative or a withdrawal from our teen's emotional bank account, then we are not really having a great connection together. So, really laying down some of our boundaries sometimes, not having every single thing be a battle, um, really picking and choosing the things that are most important in our relationship and the things that we really want to hold fast to, and then letting a lot of things go. That is really, really huge. I remember when I was reading the book Loving What Is by Byron Katie. I love the work of Byron Katie. It's been so transformative in my own life. But she shares an anecdote in her book about how before she had this big awakening in her life, she was like the sock police. She was always telling her kids to pick up their socks, pick up their socks, pick up their socks. And that resonated so much with me because I was the same way. I mean, literally, I'm looking at my teenage son's dirty socks on the floor as we speak. Because, honestly, it's a battle, just like Byron Katie, that I decided to let go. I decided it was not worth it. It was not worth the disconnection and the argument about, telling my kid that he needed to pick up his socks again and again and again. And so now I just literally, when I see the socks, I walk by and I pick them up and I put them in the hamper. And for me, that's a win because it's one less thing I have to nag him about or create disconnection about. And then I have room to set the boundaries for the things that are a lot more important than dirty socks on the floor. All right. So, with that, let's go ahead and dive into this episode. Welcome to Parents and Teens Rising, the podcast that bridges the gap between parents and teens and helps families thrive. I'm Jasmine Chandler, teen and parent coach, wilderness rites of passage guide, and founder of Guided Passages. After over 16 years of working with young people, I know how challenging and rewarding these years can be. Each week, we'll explore real conversations, practical tools, and fresh perspectives to help you connect with your teen, support their confidence, and navigate the ups and downs. Let's rise together. Okay, so first of all, what I want to talk about is why boundaries matter. All right, so boundaries often get a bad rap, right? A lot of us grew up with the idea that boundaries are about control, about laying down the law and keeping our kids in line, right? But really, healthy boundaries aren't about control at all. They're about safety, respect, and preparation for independence, really. And so boundaries give teens and kids in general something to push against as they figure out who they are. And as much as they may roll their eyes or complain, research shows that clear, consistent boundaries really help them to feel secure. So I like to think of boundaries like a fence with a gate, not a locked door. The fence creates the structure, but the gate leaves room for flexibility, negotiation, and growth. And that's where the connection comes in, right? Because if a boundary is something that we are collaborating on together, I collaborate with my teenager. I listen to them. I hear their point of view, their perspective, what's important to them. And then I shift and change the boundary to reflect both of our needs so that both of our needs can get met. Not only is the boundary much more likely to get respected, but our connection is going to stay strong in the process, right? So the next piece is how can we really start these boundary conversations, right? So I want to give you a few tips here. And the first one is to pick the right moment. This is so huge, right? So don't bring up big topics when emotions are high, all right? So I can think back to an example when I was driving my daughter to school a few months, I guess it was last year because we just finished summer. But I was driving her to school and she was having a morning, she was emotions were already high. She was anticipating her day and, she was maybe a little bit grumpy, right? And for some reason, I didn't really think this through clearly, but she was on her phone and I decided that that was the moment to talk about screen time boundaries, right? That she's on her phone too much and that we need to really limit our amount of screen time. But, it was an instantaneous shutdown, an instantaneous defensive reaction. And it just escalated her experience that much more because she was already in a heightened experience, right? She was already in a heightened moment. And so that was not the moment for me to bring that up, right? And immediately I knew it once I felt the pushback, right? I was like, oh crap, right? I did it. I brought something up in a moment that it's not going to be received. And there's no way it's going to actually be followed through on right now. And the only thing that's going to be produced in this moment by me bringing this up is to, increase her grumpiness, increase her emotional state, and create disconnection, right? So picking the right moment is so, so huge, right? The second tip I want to recommend is using I statements. So instead of you always break the rules or you're always on your phone too much, try something like, I feel really worried when I don't know where you are. Okay, so bring it back to yourself. When we take the you out, it's less likely to create defensive reactions. All right. And then we can really frame it as a collaboration, not control. And this is what I just mentioned a moment ago, but teens respond better to anything, right? Anything, just like we all do as humans. They respond better when they feel heard. So instead of saying, you can't go out that late, you can try something like, I need to know you're safe. And I also get that you want freedom, right? So what's a curfew that feels fair to both of us? So in that way, I'm still setting a boundary, but I'm inviting my teen into the process. So that way the boundary is much more likely to be honored and the connection still stays strong, right? So it's really, really, really huge in the way that we do it. When we as parents take on an authoritarian approach, like lay down the law, do it because I said so, my way or the highway, all those ways that, people in my generation, we were often raised in that way. Those are not the ways that we're actually going to produce the result that we want. And they are the ways that we're going to create distance in our relationship and not have the kind of relationship we want with our teen and not be able to have the kind of influence over our teen's life that we want because they stop listening to us. They stop valuing our opinion, valuing our wisdom, our advice, or all of our methods of support when we are cracking down in authoritarian ways. Okay. So including them in the conversation, valuing their point of view, giving them a voice and a choice in the things that impact them in their life, that is so huge, right? These are like mini adults. I mean, we're talking teenagers here. They are not that far off from being independent on their own in the world. So the more we can start giving them the respect, as young adult people, right? Young humans, they're not adults yet, but we start building those skills for them. We're scaffolding for them, right? And so we want to start giving them the kind of respect that they deserve and that we all deserve as humans, right? Listening, valuing, implementing things that they want, not just what we think, right? And this has obvious limits, right? There are obvious things as parents that, we have to be really firm about for safety. It might be, the party that they want to go to that we know isn't a safe place for them to be. Or it might be the types of things they're involved with on the internet. Whatever it might be, there are some things that we need to be hard and fast about. We can still do it in a way that doesn't feel like we are trying to control them, but that we are trying to keep them safe. Okay. So the way that we present it, the way that we invite them into the conversation, the way that we hear them and validate their own experience, the more likely we'll have success with the boundaries we set. All right, so I want to give you one more example of how to set a boundary with your teenager. All right, so a few months back, my 14-year-old asked about getting a new ear piercing, and I said I was okay with it as long as she paid for it herself. And that didn't go over well. She got really frustrated and she told me it wasn't fair. And then she blurted out that she would just go and pierce it herself, right? And so I had to take a pause there and take a breath. And I let her know, I'm not okay with you piercing your ear yourself. And that's when she got really elevated. And she started to kind of, raise her voice, and her tone got a little bit some way. And so I had to set another boundary, which was, hey, listen, I'm really happy to have this conversation with you, but I can tell that you're getting frustrated right now, and the tone that's happening is not working for me. So we're going to have to take a pause on this conversation. And when we're both calm again, we can start it up again. All right. Boundaries don't always have to get resolved right in that moment, right? We might start setting a boundary and it might create a reaction. And most likely it will create a reaction because our teens don't necessarily think they want boundaries. And so we're telling them that they can't do something that they want to do, or they need to do it in a different way than what they want to do. And so that's going to create a reaction. And so when that reaction happens, it's that moment of recognition of, okay, we're now elevated, and I don't want to have a screaming match in the bathroom in the morning before we head out the door. And so pausing is so powerful. Let's take a breath, let's take a beat, and we can talk about this again later when we're both calm, right? So we don't have to resolve it right in that moment. We can start the conversation and then we can finish it later, and then that also gives us some more time for reflection too. What is it about her piercing her ear on her own that I have an issue with? That way I can articulate that clearly to her. I can also talk about the reasoning behind why I think, she needs to pay for it herself or whatever it might be, right? All right, so let's recap what we talked about today. So first of all, boundaries are about guidance and safety and respect. They're not about control. Include your teen's voice whenever you can. Include their thoughts and their ideas. Let them have a voice and a choice in the conversations that impact their life. Save your energy for what really matters, right? So picking your battles is so important. Maybe the socks are something that you can let go, right? Maybe the shoes in the middle of the floor, whatever it is, whatever those little triggers are, like which ones can we start to shift the way we're thinking about them? So with that, I would love to hear from you. What's one boundary you're struggling with right now? Feel free to send me a DM. And if you found this helpful, please do make sure to share this episode with another parent who needs a little encouragement today. Please do make sure to rate and review the podcast, follow it so that you can make sure to not miss an episode as well. And finally, I want to let you know that the doors opened today for a new round of my teen and young adult coaching programs, Rise Up and Ignite. These are 12-week high-touch coaching programs for 12 to 24-year-olds that help them move from anxiety and avoidance to confidence and direction. So I'm going to pop the link for those programs in the show notes below so you can check them out. And it'll also give you an opportunity to schedule a call with me if you'd like to learn more and find out if it's a good fit for your young person. All right. Thank you so much for being here today, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.